Once upon a time, before the comeback story of downtown Detroit, there was a great exodus of companies that left downtown Detroit. Where did they all go, though, once they left downtown Detroit? Well, there's a place north of Detroit called Southfield. Kind of weird that it's north of Detroit, but it's called Southfield. We'll get to why that is in a few minutes. Southfield is a fairly large suburb. In the 70s, it became a suburban office mecca, if you will. Most of the office towers can be found along the Lodge Freeway corridor, which connects Southfield with downtown Detroit. The group of skyscrapers that you just saw and can continue to see in the distance are all a part of what is called the Southfield Town Center. On rare occasion, the cluster of buildings is called the Golden Triangle. Surrounding the office complex is miles and miles of single-family homes. There's a lot of people who call Southfield home, but there's even more people who work in the offices that are spread throughout town. Throughout this video, I'm going to bounce around Southfield to show you all of the key parts of the Detroit suburb. When you first see the name of Southfield, Michigan, and you see that it's a suburb of Detroit, you're probably thinking, oh, so that's where South Detroit is. All this time you thought that it was in Windsor, but then you find out that it's actually Southfield. Yeah, no, not really, not at all. Southfield actually is northwest of Detroit. It's named Southfield because when Oakland County was being divided into townships, Southfield Township was located in the South Fields of Bloomfield Township. Simple as that. And according to this map, it looks like Southfield started at the intersection of Berg Road and Civic Center Drive. Man, these old maps, they're great, aren't they? Well, so our video transitions. We're here at the Berg Historical Park, where Southfield started at Berg Road and Civic Center Drive. Sometimes this place is referred to as the Southfield Berg. Berg as in being the village center in the 19th century. It's a good place to see and get an idea of what this area was like when Southfield was just a small farming community. You have several buildings here. This house is the Simmons House, built in 1870, which was moved here from where the McDonald Towers stand today, just a few hundred feet to the west. Behind it is the Town Hall, which was built here in 1872, and right behind the Town Hall is the first fire station for Southfield, which was built here back in 1942. This is the old Methodist Church, which was built in 1856, according to the Southfield Library's website. The 1854 on the building must have been when the congregation began. It's not a church today, rather just a small event venue. Lastly, you have the Parks Home, which was built at Evergreen and 11 Mile originally, but it was moved to this spot when the Walter P. Reuther Freeway, or 696, was being built in 1984. The Berg sits less than a mile southeast of this massive interchange, which resembles what Southfield has become over the years: suburban sprawl, corporate America, and commuter routes. Southfield. It kind of sounds like the name of a show that belongs on Adult Swim, or maybe the name of a 90s sitcom. Honestly, though, a show named Southfield probably would have done pretty well in the heyday of cable TV. South Park, Seinfeld, Southfield. Hey, what? Yeah, I think so. Heck, it might even have a shot in today's world of streaming services, so get on it, Keegan-Michael Key. Or should I say, K. Egan, who, by the way, is from Southfield. Okay, so anyway, is Southfield a good place to live, you ask? Is it a good place to work these days? Well, let's talk about what Southfield is like today, shall we? Depending on where you are in Southfield, it can be anywhere from a 15 to 30-minute drive to get to downtown Detroit. If you drive like you're from Michigan, it'll be closer to 15 minutes. Southfield has a lot of tall buildings, but not much excitement to match that corporate energy, to be quite honest. Southfield lacks in having things to do and places to go out to eat when compared to other nearby suburbs. That's why Southfield is mostly never thought of as anything more than a bustling corporate office center. Some of the towers here, of course, are office buildings, but a few of them are medical, a few of them are hotels, and a few of them are residential. Although, a few of the tall buildings here are completely empty. There is even a tower that was demoed in Southfield back in 2014. That's not to say that Southfield is a dying city or anything, because there are still plenty of buildings here that continue to thrive, but a good way to briefly put it would be that the further northwest you get from Detroit along the Lodge Freeway, the more occupied the towers are. For example, the Southfield Town Center, that we're next to right now, is for the most part doing okay these days. However, there's another area about 3 miles southeast from the town center that is not doing okay these days. Northland Center was once the most popular shopping mall in all of Metro Detroit, but this area is nothing close to that today. There's also several tall buildings surrounding the old shopping mall that have high vacancy rates, and a few of them right now are completely empty. Back to the town center towers, as there are officially 5 skyscrapers that are a part of the complex. You have the 1,000 building, the 2,000, the 3,000, the 4,000, and the 5,000 buildings. The numbers in multiple of 1,000 represent each building's address, followed by town center. The 4 large office buildings are all connected together through indoor walkways, lobbies, and a large atrium, while the 5,000 building consists of luxury condos. All of this was being built when Southfield was getting towards the end of an era of rapid development from 1960 to 1980. Along with the town center complex, you have other offices that have sprouted up to the north, northwest, and southeast. It really is an overall impressive collection of suburban offices, but of course, it was all fueled by the decline of downtown Detroit. Being built in the 1970s, Southfield was one of several major suburban office hubs being developed across the country. This was happening in other large metro areas too, such as Philadelphia, Houston, LA, and New York City. One of the biggest reasons is because land was cheaper and more spacious out in the burbs. Heck, this 1986 archived New York Times article mentions how businesses were hesitant to open up major offices in the remote suburbs at the time. But it ended up being highly beneficial to these companies since leases were cheaper, and in Detroit's case, they didn't have to worry about all of the corruption and crime that was going on in the city. The article really illustrates what the business climate was like here in Metro Detroit back in the 70s and 80s when the economic shift of the region was in full effect, saying how Southfield exploded into being a new type of downtown, yet sharing concerns of how well it was going to hold up by saying how the towers aren't connected to the community through your classic city sidewalks and streets, which continues to be the biggest drawback to the value of the offices here in Southfield today. Of course, the town center is still here and is doing well 40 years later, but unlike in 1986, today, downtown Detroit is a much more attractive location for a company to have their offices in than the Southfield Town Center is. That being said, the Southfield Town Center's biggest advantage continues to be affordability. No parking fees for employees or visitors, lower taxes for companies, lower lease rates, less financial risk, but downtown Detroit has more excitement, more of a rich culture, and unlike in 1986, all 4 pro sports teams are in downtown Detroit today, whereas only one of them was in 1986. And of course, economically, downtown Detroit is thriving in 2024. More on that 1986 New York Times article in a minute, as the fancy building that we just passed by is the Southfield Public Library. The library is a part of a larger, low-rise complex that includes other city functions, such as the City Hall and Police Department. There's a couple of parks back there as well, and there's a golf course, and there's also the Southfield Pavilion, which is a large conference center. Well, to me, the 1986 article is just fascinating because it tells a lot about what the thinking of people was at the time, and it helps explain how Southfield became to be. In 1986, Southfield actually had more office space than downtown Detroit did, with Southfield having 21 million square feet of office space, whereas downtown Detroit had 18 million square feet. That's not true anymore, but it was true then, which is pretty crazy that a newer suburb at the time had more office space than the downtown of its primary city, which, by the way, Detroit still had over 1 million people residing in the city at the time. Well, the article continues to say that Detroit, with a suburban population of 3 million people at the time, had the country's biggest suburban population after Los Angeles. Now, I know that the New York Times, for a very long time, has been one of the most credible journalistic entities out there in this country, but I personally don't know if I believe that. I find it hard to believe that Detroit had a bigger suburban population than, say, Chicago or New York City, but I do believe that it was top 5, unless they meant the ratio of people living in the suburbs compared to living in the city proper. If that's the case, then yeah, maybe Detroit was second to Los Angeles, but that's not what they specify in the article. They say that it had the largest suburban population, behind only Los Angeles. I feel like there were more than 3 million people living in the suburbs of New York City even in the 1980s, and same with Chicago. But hey, what do I know? I wasn't even born yet, so yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Additionally, Southfield in 1986 claimed to have had as many as 4,000 businesses, a workforce of 300,000 people. More than 80 Fortune 500 companies had either a headquarters or a regional office in Southfield. Also, at the time of this article, there were 11 new office buildings being constructed, whereas downtown Detroit didn't have any new construction going on because, well, everybody was leaving for suburbs like Southfield, Troy, Livonia, Farmington Hills, Royal Oak, even Warren and Sterling Heights. So yeah, this was during the peak of the Detroit exodus, the 1980s. It was not a good time for the city of Detroit. It was a great time, however, for the suburban cities and the economy of Oakland County in particular. Fast forward to the present times, and today not only does Southfield have pothole-ridden streets on the side streets that are not the main surface roads, but Southfield also has about 27 million square feet of office space, which is about 6 million more than what was reported by New York Times in 1986. Downtown Detroit, on the other hand, has 38 million square feet of office space, and that is more than double the amount of office space than what it had in 1986. So that's proof right there that at least downtown Detroit has seen a resurgence, it's seen a comeback. The rest of the city has a long way to go. That leads me to this, as pre-2020, the city of Southfield came out with a report claiming that Southfield's population rose to 175,000 people during business hours. If you subtract the population of Southfield, generally speaking, from that number, that equals to about 100,000 to the very least, who commute to Southfield for work. Back in 1986, the city claimed to have had 300,000 workers, so that's definitely a drop. Obviously, office space across the country is seeing record-breaking vacancy rates, with that number currently being at 19.6%. That being said, at the time of me uploading this video in February 2024, the Southfield submarket is currently seeing the highest level of office vacancy rates within all of Metro Detroit, at 23.4%. What is downtown Detroit's office vacancy rate, you ask? Well, it's doing a lot better than Southfield, but it's still high at 17.3%. So with downtown Detroit's resurgence and with not everyone yet being required after 4 years to return back into the office space has taken a huge hit everywhere in the country. It's something to worry about for the city of Southfield, though, because commercial office space is sort of the identity for Southfield. Southfield has been known as well for giving tax breaks to companies to set up shop in their city, while at the same time raising their property taxes for the residents to make up for the revenue. So yeah, this isn't a good thing for Southfield based on how the city has historically operated their budget. We'll have to see if Southfield is able to adjust and come out on top as time goes on. I personally think that Southfield will be just fine going forward, but I don't blame those who think otherwise, because head further south along the Lodge Freeway and you'll come across the abandoned Northland Center, or as I like to call it in recent years, Eyesore Center. Because not only was the abandoned mall an eyesore for so many years, but many of the buildings that surround the former mall aren't in great shape either. This area is a lot different than the area of town that we just saw. Northland Center closed in 2015, shortly after Macy's announced that they were closing. Later that year, the city of Southfield bought the property. When you first see all of this, especially after seeing what we just saw, 3 miles north, you can't help but think, man, what the heck happened around here? Let's start with the backstory on the place. Despite being in Southfield, Northland Center first broke ground in 1952 10 miles northwest from downtown Detroit in what used to be Southfield Township during a time when there was very little suburban development around. As you can see here, only the beginning stages of the subdivision to the west of Northland Center was just getting started. I mean, heck, what is now the Southfield Freeway looked like it was nothing other than a lazy 2-lane country road. The next available imagery is 1963, 14 years later, and in that 14-year time stretch, you can see just how much suburban sprawl occurred in this area. Back to the mall, as being from this area, I've often been told that the Northland Center was the first shopping mall ever. I believed it for a long time too, but technically Northland Center was not the first shopping mall. There's quite a few smaller ones throughout the country that were built before this one was. The Northland Center in Southfield, however, was the world's largest shopping center when it first opened. And while the Northland Center might not have been the first mall technically, it doesn't really get the credit for being the first mall of its kind, that kind being a large suburban shopping mall. You know, the same type of mall that ended up getting built in almost every populated area throughout this country? Yeah, the Northland Center was the first mall of that kind. Meanwhile, the street that we've been driving on is called J.L. Hudson Drive, named after the once proud and successful retailer, Hudson's. Hudson's also happened to build Northland Center. Hudson's was a huge deal in the Detroit area with a ginormous department store in downtown. The old downtown Detroit Hudson store at Woodward and Gratiot was the tallest department store in the world during its heyday, standing at 410 feet high. It was also the second largest retail store in the world, only to the Macy's store in New York City. But after the massive downtown location closed its retail store, an extra 50,000 square feet was added to the Hudson store in Northland, giving the store as much as 550,000 square feet of retail space. In 1986, Hudson's abandoned their downtown Detroit location completely by moving their corporate offices from downtown to the top floor of the Northland location. Over the years, however, the Hudson's brand became defunct. Hudson's was renamed to Marshall Fields for a short time, and then in 2006, Macy's took over the old Hudson store here in Northland Center, staying for only 9 years before closing. So long story short, Hudson's was once a giant retailer, only to become irrelevant slowly but surely over time. Going back to that 1963 aerial shot, as what's really noticeable is just how many people are parked in the parking lot of the mall. There were as many as 8,344 parking spaces. Now, just by looking at how many people are parked here, can you imagine the amount of screaming and crying children as you walk around and try to shop? All the people trying to maneuver through the walkways like it's passing period in high school? Yeah, this photo makes Northland Center look like Crazy Town for sure. Also, now that we're zoomed in, you can see how both the Lodge and Southfield freeways are starting to take shape. In 2021, Copytex Contour Companies bought the Northland site, saying that it was vacant, bankrupt, vandalized, derelict in the worst possible way, including being home to a pack of coyotes. As the former Northland site continues to go through teardown and redevelopment stage, people in charge of the project are making it a top priority to preserve the original Hudson's anchor store. Otherwise, there's a lot of different parts to the redevelopment plans of the site, as the property is over 100 acres large. Leaders of the project are calling it the Northland City Center and refer to it as becoming a city within a city, including space for as many as 2,500 residents. At the end of that drone shot, you could make out the new Costco Business Center. This was built on the southern end of the property, so it's good to see that things are starting to take shape after the Northland Center resembled a ghost town for the better part of the new millennium. There's also plenty of retail space that's a part of the new plans for the site as well, hence the city in a city concept. The developers also mention how the plans call for the site to look much like the original 1954 concept of Northland Center when it was an open-air mall. Well, there's other things to look at and talk about with this area as well, because the popularity of the mall made the land surrounding Northland very desirable for a while. Throughout the 70s, there was a building boom of office towers, as I was mentioning earlier in the video. There were apartment buildings as well, along with a few hotels surrounding Northland Center. Today, many of these buildings look rather depressing, ugly, unappealing, decaying, doom and gloom. Plus, they're all surrounded by deteriorating pavement from old parking lots that are mostly empty. Back in 2014, there was a teardown of a young 40-year-old office building off of 9 Mile Road, that being the North Park Plaza. The building stood vacant for only 4 years before Oakland Community College bought the property and decided to tear it down. The latest tenants complained about how bad of shape the building was in. Additionally, the Ramada Inn, that was just east of the North Park Plaza, that was demolished a year prior as well. The two neighboring sites have been an empty grass field for the past 10 years, and here's what it used to look like before they were torn down. The first building that we're looking at here is the Ramada Inn, torn down in the summer of 2013, while the second building that you're about to see is the North Park Plaza, that was torn down in December 2014. Next up on the implosion list very well could be the old Southfield Plaza Hotel, sitting along the Lodge Freeway and JL Hudson Drive. As of February 2024, the property that the empty 14-story hotel sits on has been fenced off, as vandals and trespassers have continued to damage the property over the years. The hotel has been abandoned since 2010. The owners of the property have filed for bankruptcy and have done nothing with it. The city of Southfield really wants something to be done with this building, but no word is officially out at the time of me uploading this video on whether or not demolition is in the works. You can see several windows popped out of place, and you can see some boarded up windows here too. But can't really get much further back in there because it's all blocked off because it's a construction site, so there you go. Moving on now, as Southfield is also home to 3 out of the 4 major network TV stations for the Detroit market. The only one left out is the NBC affiliate, which is in downtown Detroit. The Fox 2 station is right across 9 Mile from the 2 bulldozed buildings that I was talking about a minute ago. WXYZ, which is an ABC affiliate, is off of 10 Mile west of the Lodge, and the CBS affiliate is in no man's land off of 11 Mile near the border with Farmington Hills. There's several major Detroit market radio stations in Southfield as well. It's all a part of the movement throughout the 20th century when both the economy and the people ditched Detroit City proper, which greatly benefited Southfield and other northern suburbs. Well, time for a change of scenery, as there's more to Southfield than commercial real estate. Along with having a mixture of abandoned and occupied shiny glass skyscrapers, Southfield is also known for its large collection of mid-century modern homes. Houses here also aren't near as expensive as what you'll find in places like Bloomfield Hills and Birmingham to the north, so that would be a draw for people to want to live in Southfield. At the same time, property taxes in Southfield are notoriously higher than they are in the surrounding communities. Southfield's collection of mid-century modern homes came from the 50s and 60s construction boom that occurred here. Housing demand in the suburbs skyrocketed post-World War II as people started to flee the city of Detroit. There's even a few neighborhoods here that are listed on the NRHP in order to preserve the unique style of homes. But yeah, a lot of Southfield's residential areas look like this. Fully developed neighborhoods with medium-sized single-family homes with fully grown trees along the streets. Otherwise, a large portion of town southwest of the Lodge Freeway has a woodsy feel, so that's all good and dandy. You can check out my second video on Southfield where I'll show you more of that part of town. And once that video is uploaded, The link will be down below. Here's the population growth of Southfield over time. The only thing that really stands out is the spike in growth in the 1960s. Since then, the population has really stayed around the same. About 75,000 people live in Southfield today, with the median household income coming in at $63,000 per year. 38% of adults 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher, and the median value of owner-occupied housing units is $212,000, while the poverty rate is 11%. When it comes to the crime rates, Southfield sees above average crime. It really just depends on where you are in the city. The parts that are further away from Detroit tend to be safer. Also, depending on where you are in Southfield, you could be a part of one of the 3 different school districts that serve the city. The schools that are further away from Detroit tend to be better. Most of the suburb falls within the Southfield School District, with parts of the highly respected Bloomfield School District in the northeast and the Oak Park School District in the southeast. There are 2 high schools a part of the Southfield School District, one being Southfield High School for the Arts and Technology, formerly called Southfield High School, which we're here right now. This one is measured as the lower of the 2 schools in terms of academics, and it's not even close, to be quite honest. The athletic teams go by the Warriors. Among the most notable alumni would be the late rapper Blade Icewood, TikTok food critic Keith Lee, his brother, UFC fighter Kevin Lee, musician Kareem Riggins, who's worked with multiple well-established artists, and Baseball Hall of Famer Ted Simmons, among others. The other high school in the Southfield School District is sort of a makeshift high school, but it works. It's University Middle and High School Academy. Technically, it's in the Southfield enclave of Lathrop Village. This school performs much better than the other one does in town, however, academically speaking. It's in place of what used to be Southfield Lathrop High School, which closed in 2016. Among the most notable alumni for Southfield Lathrop would be founder of Quicken Loans and owner of the NBA's Cleveland Cavaliers, Dan Gilbert, comedian John Glazer, sons of NHL legend Gordie Howe, Mark and Marty Howe. You also have billionaire Eric Lefkowski, among others. Lawrence Tech is the university in Southfield, named after its founder, Russell E. Lawrence. Lawrence Tech sits opposite the town center from the Lodge Freeway. The university began in Highland Park in 1932, in which that city today is an absolute disaster. For more, make sure to check out my Highland Park video after you're done watching this one. Lawrence Tech moved to its Southfield location in 1955 before any of the other nearby office towers were built. Enrollment at the school hovers around 3,000 per given year. The athletic teams go by the Blue Devils. Among the most notable Lawrence Tech alumni includes former Microsoft CEO and current LA Clippers owner of the NBA, Steve Ballmer, along with the former founder of the now-defunct DeLorean Motor Company, John DeLorean. Well, people, it is now that time. In Southfield, you can't always trust the pothole crew, just like you can't always trust someone who regularly drinks Mountain Dew, but you can always trust Chris's livability score. First up is education. We just got done talking about it, and honestly, it depends on where you live within Southfield, whether a kid ends up going to one of the good schools rather than some of the worse off schools. Education gets a 10 out of 20. Crime in Southfield isn't the worst, but it could be better. Overall, things are safe here, so it gets a 12 out of 20. Downtown is next, and the area around Southfield Town Center today is what the city of Southfield wants you to call a downtown. Despite this old photo here of the downtown police station next to the old Northland Center. Back in the day, you could say that Southfield had 2 downtowns, sort of. Northland Center and the Southfield Town Center, which means that there wasn't ever really an official downtown for Southfield. If you ask locals, most don't consider Southfield to have a downtown really, at least a traditional one. If the town center area is a downtown, it's a weird one, that's for sure. There's a few restaurants along the stretch of Evergreen between 11 and 12 Mile. There's enough options there to satisfy office workers on their lunch breaks, but outside of business hours, Southfield becomes a ghost town really quick. Plenty of nightlife and better restaurant scenes can be found elsewhere in the Metro Detroit area. The urban environment here is not like what you would find in a downtown Detroit or Ann Arbor or other suburban cities like Royal Oak, making those places much more attractive environments for young professionals to live and work in. Downtown gets a 7 out of 20. The economy of Southfield is one of the bright spots. I don't read too much into the current office vacancy rates, nor the blighted tower surrounding Northland Center. The Northland Center is at least getting redeveloped nicely so far, and with Southfield basically being in the geographic center of the Metro Detroit area, and with it being in Oakland County instead of Wayne, the economy is, and I believe will continue to be fine here. It gets a 14 out of 20. Recreational opportunities are far and few in between. There are some parks here and there in Southfield providing some decent places to hike and enjoy the outdoors, but it's further away from the water recreation opportunities that can be found in so many places throughout southeast Michigan. I mean, you can always drive to them, I guess, but there's other places that you can live if outdoor recreation is important to you. Recreation gets a 6 out of 20. History is next, and Southfield was a uniquely developed suburb. It was one of the first suburban office centers in the country. It was also home to the first mega suburban shopping mall, unofficially, but kind of officially too at the same time. I mean, remember, there was a time where Southfield had more office space than downtown Detroit did. That's crazy. I would say that Southfield has a different type of history than your traditional city because obviously it's a suburb, but for being a suburb, it's as much of a suburb as a suburb gets. It's like a suburb on steroids with all the skyscrapers, so I would say it gets a 15 out of 20. Amenities is next, and although you can find pretty much any store that you would want or need in Southfield, this place lacks in having a unique variety of restaurants. That's always been Southfield's biggest gripe. Regardless, I'll give it a 13 out of 20. Lastly is cost of living, and while the price of the homes up front in Southfield are less than more posh suburbs to the north, the property taxes in Southfield are higher than they are in many other Oakland County suburbs. They're also not as atrocious as what you'll find in some downriver suburbs and of course in Detroit City proper, but the property taxes in Southfield don't look great when compared to other Oakland County communities, so cost of living gets a 15 out of 20. All in all, the Chris Livability score for Southfield, Michigan is 92 out of 160, putting it in 18th place out of all of the cities that I've done this for so far. Final thoughts here, as some of the things that I like about Southfield includes the architecture of some of the office towers in the northern part of the city. I also like the location of Southfield. People who live in Southfield really are in the center of it all, as in the center of Metro Detroit. It's really not a bad place to live if you're someone who really values being in close proximity to everything, or maybe you work in Southfield and you want to live right next to where you work and not have to fight traffic on 696 or the Lodge every morning. On the flip side, it's not necessarily the best place that you could decide to live when scouting the area. Neighboring cities have lower property taxes, better schools, lower crime, better roads with fewer potholes. Unless it's Detroit, of course, but hopefully in 10 years the Northland area can look a lot different. Only time will tell on that. You can compare Southfield to other Detroit area suburbs and form your own opinions on places by checking out videos in this playlist here.